In this video, in commemoration of the Christmas season, we'll be looking at just briefly one of the most amazing aspects of the birth of Jesus Christ. I'm titling this video, When the Untouchable Became Touchable. We can find the Christmas story in Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. It says, at the time, the Roman Emperor Augustus decreed that a census should be taken throughout the Roman Empire. This was the first census taken when Quirinius was governor of Syria. All returned to their own ancestral towns to register for the census. And because Joseph was a descendant of King David, he had to go to Bethlehem in Judea, David's ancient home. He traveled there from the village of Nazareth in Galilee. He took with him Mary, to whom he was engaged, who was now expecting a child. And while they were there, the time came for her baby to be born. She gave birth to him, her firstborn son. She wrapped him snugly in stripes of cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no lodging available for them. Now, in this story, with the birth of Jesus, we see an amazing event occurs. With the birth of Christ, God comes upon the earth and takes upon flesh. This event creates what we call the hypostatic union. So in the hypostatic union, Jesus has taken upon two complete natures. This means that he has become fully human, but is of course also fully divine. He's not part human or part divine. And so what it teaches us is that the God-man, Jesus, is not two persons, rather he's one person. So the hypostatic union technically could be defined as the joining, mysteriously, of the divine and the human into one person, the person being Jesus. Now, the question, of course, is why did God have to take on flesh? Now, the most important answer, the one that is most prevalent to the world, the one that we celebrate around Easter time, of course, is that God needed a human body that could die. God needed flesh that could be crucified. He couldn't die for the sins of the world as God alone because he can't die. So he needed a flesh, a body that can be bruised, it could be damaged, it could be killed. But that's not the aspect that I want to focus on today. We're going to look at something else that is going on here as well, because Jesus could have taken on human flesh as a 33-year-old man and jumped straight on the cross and died for the sins of the world and been done with it in an afternoon and then been resurrected on the third day. And he never had to live a life on earth. But there's something else going on in the story of Christ, in the birth of him, in the hypostatic union, something important that sometimes gets lost that we're going to focus on in this lesson. In 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 through 7, it says, Then David again gathered all the elite troops in Israel, 30,000 in all. He led them to Baalah of Judah to bring back the ark of God, which bears the name of the Lord of the heavens' armies, who was enthroned between the cherubim. They placed the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from Abinadab's house, which was on a hill. Uzzah and Ahiah, Abinadab's sons, were guiding the cart. They carried the ark of God. Ahiah walked in front of the ark. David and all the people of Israel were celebrating before the Lord, singing songs and playing all kinds of musical instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. But when they arrived at the threshing floor of Nacon, the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out his hand and steadied the ark of God. Then the Lord's anger was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him dead because of this. So Uzzah died right there beside the ark. Now, to give a little background, this picture shows an example of what we believe the Ark of the Covenant looked like. It was a box that was encased in gold. On top of it, it had two cherubims or angelic beings, and then it had loops on the side of it where poles would be stuck into to be able to carry the ark. It was believed that this ark, what was sometimes called the mercy seat of God, was where God's holiness, God's presence was more present than anywhere else on the earth at the time of his existence. He seated himself upon the ark, and the ark was to be placed inside of the temple of God. And that was where God's full presence, or as close to his full presence as we could get, was made available. Now, normally, only the high priest could have any kind of workings with the ark, except for when it was being transported, like here. Now, the way it was supposed to be done, they had those loops, as in the picture. Poles were placed in the side of it, and then you'd have a man on either end of the poles, and they would pick it up and put it on their shoulder, and they'd carry it. But in this case, they didn't do that. They put the ark on a cart, and it wasn't being carried properly. And as it began to, as the oxen stumbled and the cart fell over, Uzzah touched it and he died. So that raises the question, why did Uzzah die? And how does that relate to what our story is talking about? Well, the reason is because the ark had God's presence on it in such a powerful sense, then God's holiness was displayed on it. See, God is holy, but he's not just holy. He is perfectly holy. He is so holy that he cannot come into the presence or into the contact of sin at all. Nothing sinful can touch God. His holiness is so powerful that any evil, any sin, any bad is obliterated by it, kind of like a fire, or like standing on the surface of the sun. We couldn't come into contact with that. We couldn't get that close to a fire. We can kind of stand at a distance and feel heat from the fire, but the closer we get to it, the more intense the heat gets. And then if we tried to touch the fire, we would burn and it would consume or destroy us. God's holiness works like that. Because Uzzah was unholy, when he touched the ark, God's holiness was so powerful that it killed him instantly. You see, before Christ came, God and man had a permanent separation. God's holiness was so powerful that there was always a separation between man and God. God's holiness was so overpowering that it killed sinful man, which is why hell was created. Because when we die, we have to go somewhere. And since we are dying in sin, we couldn't come into the presence of God. God had to create a place for us to spend eternity in, separated from him, because his holiness was too powerful for us as sinful people to be permanently in his full presence. And so before the hypostatic union, before the coming of that is the state that God and man existed in. But after the coming of Christ, we see something extraordinary that happens, something that has changed, that is going to break down that separation between man and God. We're going to look in Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 3 to see an example of this. Here in Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 3, it says, "Large crowds followed Jesus as he came down the mountainside. Suddenly a man with leprosy approached him and knelt before him. 'Lord,' the man said, 'if you are willing, you can heal me and make me clean.' Jesus reached out and touched him. 'I am willing,' he said. 'Be healed.' And instantly the leprosy disappeared. Then Jesus said to him, 'Don't tell anyone about this. Instead, go to the priest and let him examine you. Take along the offering required in the law of Moses for those who have been healed of leprosy. This will be a public testimony that you have been cleansed.'" Okay, so to give you a little bit of background on this, in the Old Testament Levitical law, if anybody took on leprosy, which is a legitimate disease, but in the Bible they termed a lot of different kind of infections and skin diseases as just leprosy. But if you had what was considered to be leprosy and it came upon your flesh, you were not allowed to be in the presence of other people, of other Israelites. You had to separate yourself out. You could not be touched by them. As a matter of fact, anybody that touched you became instantly unclean themselves and were now also isolated from community. You couldn't go to worship, and if you walked down the street of a busy crowd, you would have to say publicly out loud, "Unclean, unclean," so that other people would know not to touch you or be around you. So that's the kind of man that was coming to Jesus. So this man comes up to Christ and he begs him to heal him. Now, in my opinion, I don't think this man ever actually thought that Jesus was going to do what he does. He was hoping that he'd heal him, but Jesus, God, we've seen in other parts of the scripture, he did not have to touch people to heal them. He didn't even have to be in the same room in order to heal them. He could heal with a word across large distances. So this man probably wasn't even imagining that Jesus was going to actually touch him. He just wanted a healing. But Jesus actually reaches out and he puts his hand on this man. He touches him. And the reason why that's significant is because he was unclean. Normally, to touch a leprous man would be to also become unclean. And what did we say at the verse before about God? God is so holy that to touch God would be to kill you, because his holiness is so powerful that it wipes out and eliminates sin instantly. So for humans, unholiness and uncleanliness, when we come into contact with it, it makes us tainted and it makes us unclean. For God, before this time period, to do that would be to destroy them. But see, when Jesus took on flesh, when he actually took on human flesh, the hypostatic union, it allowed him for the first time to be able to break down that separation. It allowed him to be able to actually physically touch us, human beings. And what's so amazing about this is that this man, when Jesus touched him, His touch didn't kill the man, and it didn't make Jesus unclean. As a matter of fact, when Jesus touched him, it made the leper instantly clean. So now, by taking on flesh, by Jesus actually coming to earth and putting himself in a human body, he can now dip his hands into the dirt and the grime of sin in this world. And when he touches us, when he comes to us and he actually has contact with us through love, he cleanses us. Before, God's holiness condemned, God's touch killed. But because of Jesus, because of him taking on a human body, it allowed God's touch now to heal, to clean, and most importantly, for this man, it allowed him to love. God has the ability now to touch us in love because he wanted there to be no more separation. God wanted to be able to come to us, to be able to physically have contact with his children because he loves us. He wanted to be able to hug us, to be able to hold us, to be able to put his hand on our shoulder, and to be able to tell us that this world is going to get better, that it's going to be okay. He could have cleansed at a distance. He could have died on the cross at a distance. He didn't have to touch anybody when he came here, but he chose to do that. And so one of the most remarkable things about Jesus' taking on flesh is, yes, it gave him a body to kill, to be killed. I mean, it gave him a body that could be killed, but it also gave him a body that could love and that could touch. And so what's so beautiful about this that I want to leave us with is to understand that Jesus' birth created now a way for God to bring love and to bring healing through his touch. And that's something that we Christians should take to heart and understand, that we are to spread that love as well. Now, while Jesus isn't here anymore physically on this earth, so he can't physically touch people, we can. And we're to go out and to put hands on people, to hug people, to hold people's hands and tell them they're okay. And ultimately, in the end, we get the blessing of knowing that one day, when we enter into the eternal kingdom, we're going to see Jesus face to face, and he's going to be able to really actually hug us and tell us that he loves us and show the compassion the same way that he showed this man. So I want to leave you with that in this Christmas season that we've got coming up. When you look at the birth of Christ, you understand the beauty of what that flesh did and the reason why God did it, the separation that he broke down, and the importance of that body that was not only died for us, but also lived and loved for us and touched us.